We're always seeing the headlines, the numbers, the statistics, but today we're going to dive deeper. We're going to look at the human story behind the Afghan journey to Europe. We'll explore the tough decisions, the incredible dangers, and the bureaucratic maze that defines one of the most significant migrations of our time. So, let's get into it.
Think about this for a second. This was the guiding principle for a camp manager on the Greek island of Lesbos back in 2016. A simple, really powerful idea of hospitality, what the Greeks call philoxenia. But, as we're about to see, this beautiful idea would soon collide with a much, much harsher reality, one defined by politics, by borders, and by the very words we choose to describe people in need.
So let's set the scene. Picture this. It's 2015, and we're on the Greek island of Lesbos. This place, it became the absolute epicenter of a humanitarian crisis on a scale Europe really hadn't seen in decades. We're talking about over 500,000 people arriving on this one small island in a single year. Our screens were just flooded with these powerful, often heartbreaking images of their journey.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this story, we first have to look at the language that's used to tell it. Because the words we choose, words like refugee or migrant, they aren't just simple labels. They have huge, life-altering consequences.
And here it is. This is the core distinction that completely dominated the conversation in 2015. A refugee is someone fleeing conflict, and because of that, they're legally entitled to international protection. But the word migrant, which can imply that someone's moving for, say, economic reasons, well, that carries far fewer legal obligations for the countries they arrive in. So you see, this was never just a debate about words. It was a debate about responsibility.
But what's so fascinating is how the reality on the ground just smashes those neat categories to pieces. The UN talks about mixed flows for a reason. Because an asylum seeker who's running from a war zone and a person escaping crushing poverty, they might end up in the exact same flimsy boat, facing the exact same dangers. The labels don't matter out on the open sea.
All right, so let's rewind. Let's go right back to the very beginning of the journey. What on earth compels a person, or an entire family, to leave everything they've ever known and step into the unknown?
And this right here, this gets to the absolute heart of the problem. A government, a state, it needs to put you in a box. It needs a label to process your case. But in individual's reality, it is almost never that simple. The reasons someone leaves can change and evolve along the way. The trouble is, only the state's definition has any real power. Yeah, the decision to leave is almost never about just one thing. It's this complex blend of factors. It's about survival, sure, escaping physical danger, but it's also about aspiration, wanting a life where your kids can get an education. For so many Afghan families, it's what you could call a household strategy, sending family members to different places to spread out the risk and create a kind of global safety net.
So, the decision is made. Now we follow them into the journey itself. And this is a story of being in transit, of these incredibly perilous crossings, and of the vast, uncertain, in-between spaces that separate a lost home from an unknown future.
To even have a chance of getting past the walls of Fortress Europe, almost everyone has to rely on a smuggler. Now, we hear that word and we immediately think criminal. But from the perspective of the people making this journey, it's so much more complicated. They're seen as a necessary, if absolutely terrifying service provider, a business that exists only because there are no legal ways to cross.
And this journey is unbelievably expensive. $4,000. Let that sink in for a minute. That's an absolute fortune, an amount that often forces families to sell their homes or pool together every cent of their life savings. The point is, this is not a decision people take lightly. It's a massive investment, and for many, it's a point of no return.
And then there's the human cost, the sheer terror. This quote from Fatima, a 64-year-old Afghan woman, it's just heart-wrenching. You have to imagine, for people from a landlocked country like Afghanistan, the sea itself is this terrifying alien monster. This isn't some grand adventure. It's a life-or-death gamble fueled by absolute profound fear.
There's actually a word for this state of being. Liminality. It basically means you're stuck in a threshold. You're betwixt in between. You've left your old life behind, but you haven't arrived at a new one. You have no status, no rights, and almost zero control over your own life. You are just waiting. So what happens when this dangerous journey finally ends on a European shore? Well, the truth is, a new, and in some ways, much more confusing journey is just about to begin.
Yeah, this is the key question, isn't it? Arrival is not a finish line.
It's actually the starting line for a long confrontation with a complex, completely overwhelmed, and often contradictory bureaucratic system. At the very heart of that system is something called the Dublin Regulation. Now, on paper, it sounds logical enough. The first European Union country you set foot in is the one responsible for handling your asylum claim. It's meant to stop people from applying in a bunch of different countries.
But in practice, the system is fundamentally broken. It just completely falls apart. It puts this impossible burden on frontline countries like Greece and Italy, which often just don't have the resources to cope. It's based on this fantasy that all countries have the same high standards, which they absolutely don't. And the result? The system actually encourages people to keep moving, to stay off the grid.
In all of this broken system, the rapidly changing political winds, it leads us to the final stage of the journey for so many. Just being stranded. They're trapped by bureaucracy and by politics.
I mean, just look at this chart. This is one island, Lesvos, in one single year. The numbers grew exponentially. We're talking from around 1,000 in January to over 130,000 in a single month by October. There's no system in the world, no matter how well designed, that could have possibly handled a shock of that magnitude.
And then the walls went up. After a very brief window where people could pass through, a domino effect of border closures just rippled across Europe. Fences went up, security checks were implemented, daily limits were imposed, and just like that, the main path, the Western Balkan route, was slammed shut, trapping tens of thousands of people in Greece.
And it's really important to remember that even before 2015, Greece wasn't exactly a welcoming place. There were these huge police operations, like Xenios Zeus, which basically used racial profiling to round up and detain undocumented people. This created this constant atmosphere of fear and made it almost impossible for many to even move around, let alone try to leave the country.
And this brings us right back to where we started. That initial beautiful idea of philoxenia, of treating people as guests, it was always connected to the idea that they were just passing through. The hospitality was for people in transit. But when the border is closed and that temporary stay became permanent, Greece was transformed from a corridor into essentially a cage.
And that leaves us with this final, really haunting question. What does it mean to be a guest if you can never leave? When a journey has no end, the lines between host and guest, between sanctuary and prison, they start to blur, leaving millions of people stranded on the margins, still looking in.